Okay, welcome. Good evening to many of you. Good afternoon to some of you. We're thrilled to have you join us for the first of our content presentations in our series Silent Heroes Untold Stories of the U.S. Marine Corps in World War II. I'm Lynn O'Hara from National History Day. I'm here with Mrs. Kate Kennedy and Dr. Christopher Hamner, and we are so excited to be kicking this off. I always said I love when we get to do a new webinar, and this is a new one that was just created just for this group. So we are going to start off by thanking the team at the National Cemetery Administration for making this possible. Mr. Holliday, the team cannot join us live tonight, but he did pass a message along. We sent over on Monday the final list of all the people you've selected, and he was really blown away and impressed.
Awesome.
And there are more than, I think there's 111 stories on our list that we are so excited to be telling and working with you this year. All right, we're going to go on and talk about just a few little housekeeping items, some things to know. First off, teachers, you are getting an email right now from Google Classroom saying that your webinar is late. Don't worry about it. The two systems don't interface. We will go in tomorrow. For those of you who are here and do your survey, we'll go ahead and get you the credit. But don't stress about that. I know it always makes somebody worry and they start emailing back, and just take a deep breath. We want you to join us live. We are so excited to have both teachers and also some students and parents joining us. Some things to know. We have a Q&A box that stays open the whole time. Feel free to drop in questions, and Mrs. Kennedy will let us know if we should either take it now or we'll hold to the Q&A session at the end. We do use live captioning. If this helps you, wonderful. If you find it distracting, just hit the live CC button on your toolbar and it'll turn it off. You can toggle it on and off as you'd like. We ask everybody at the end to fill out a very brief survey. This gives us our attendance credit, and students, if you fill it out, there is a student option. We will let your teachers know that you were here live tonight because we think that's important that they know that. It also gives us feedback and information because as soon as we finish this one, we start planning for the one that's going to come at the end of October. All of these materials, the slides, the video link, and actually even a bonus video, will be posted tomorrow to Google Classroom. And teachers, you can share those links with anybody who'd like to watch it after the fact. What we're doing this month is focusing on life before World War II. So tonight we're going to do a little bit of history and a little bit of research. And we're building towards our research organizers that were open last Friday, that will be due on Friday, October 24th. And that's our turnaround day. So that's the day that you're going to turn those in, if not earlier. We love early submissions. But then that's also the day that we release the next module where we focus on home front and communities. We are also working on a press release that will go out on November 10th. That's intentional because it's the day before Veterans Day, and we're going to be doing some early pitching. So teachers will send you more info on that as we get closer. Teachers, thank you to everybody who clicked into the link that I sent last week and confirmed the spelling of your name and your Silent Hero's name and made sure we got all of those details correct. All right, that's enough for me. I'll be coming back in a little bit, but I would like to turn things over to Dr. Hamner. He's going to start with the big picture here, right? The overview and the history of the Marine Corps, because we always say in History Day, you have to have historical context. So we can't just start in 1939 or 1941. We've got to understand a little bit about the history of this branch. So he's going to do the first part of the webinar, and then he's going to flip it back to me, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the research skills and strategies, and then we'll open up to Q&A. All right, that's a lot. Let's dive on in. Dr. Hamner, it's all yours. And
Thank
we're
you
going to
so
start in my
much.
home city. This is good.
Hey, thank you so much, Ms. O'Hara. Thank you all for joining us tonight. I cannot tell you how excited I am to get started with our webinar series. And a big thank you to the National Cemetery Administration for the support of this program. I have no doubt that we are going to turn up some amazing stories about Marine service in the Second World War. And what I wanted to do with the first half of tonight's webinar is talk a little bit about the history of the Marine Corps, which goes all the way back in American history before the country was a country, and talk about some of the ways in which the Marine Corps branch is distinctive and it has a very particular culture. Its culture is rooted in its history. We'll go back into the late 18th century and come all the way up through the early 20th century to give you a better sense about the the service branch that your silent hero is joining. And I think it's pretty interesting and distinctive in its own way. I had a great time pulling together all of the various pieces of Marine Corps history that I've gathered in the last 10 years. This gives me a great thing to do with them. So the history of the US Marine Corps goes all the way back before the Declaration of Independence in 1776. It is founded at the Tun Tavern in November of 1775. And in fact, they are celebrating their 250th birthday later this autumn. And the Marine Corps celebrates its birthday every year. So if you are on a military post, they will have a cake in the morning and they will sing happy birthday and everyone will wear their dress blues. There is a real, I think, unusual and special culture to the Marines that is rooted in this 200, 250 years of service. As someone was saying in the Q&A box, the Marines begin as security aboard naval ships, not just providing security against piracy, but also providing security for the officers from the enlisted seamen. In the 17th and 18th century, in other navies, there is often a lot of tension between the officers who command the ship and compel the sailors to do a lot of difficult, unpleasant things. And the sailors often felt some ambivalence or hostility towards the officers. And there's a lot more sailors than there are officers. And so the Marines in, say, the Royal Navy exist to provide some security so that there isn't a mutiny on board. The American Marines serve on board vessels in the War of Independence, but then in 1783, the Marines are dissolved at the end of the War of Independence. And the story afterwards is a story of a military branch that I think is kind of an outlier in the American military and has always been kind of scrapping for a role and trying to remind America why they should continue to exist. And you'll see a couple of recruiting posters later in the presentation that are drawing very much on this long history. There's two examples here prominently listing their history. 1775. The Marines have been part of American history for a long time, as they are happy to remind us. The unusual culture of the Marine Corps, this organization that your silent hero will have joined sometime in the early 1940s, I think grows from a couple of things. So the first is the fact that the Marines are not, written into the fabric of the nation. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution gives Congress the power to raise and support armies and to provide and maintain a navy. But there is no constitutional instruction to have a Marine Corps. And so from very nearly its inception, Marines have lived in fear that they are the sort of smallest smallest dog at the feeding trough, or they're the smallest dog at the bowl, and they are always worried about one of two things happening. You can see as we get into World War II how much smaller the Marines are than the Army. This is the 1939 military. It is nowhere near the size it will need to be in order to fight in Europe and to fight in the Pacific. In 1939, the Marine Corps is less than 20,000 people. I think that's less than the number of enrolled undergraduates at George Mason University, where I teach right now. The Army outnumbers the Marines by 9-1. There are almost 10 times as many personnel in the Army. In 1940, American planners can see that there is, an urgency to get the country on a war footing, and the entire military begins to grow really rapidly. But we'll see the other branches are growing faster than the Marine Corps. Even as we get into the war itself, the Marines have gone from 19,000 to 54,000, but the Army has gone from 190,000 to 1.5 million. Now the Army outnumbers the Marine Corps 27 to 1. Even by the end of the war, the Army's gone from 1.4 million to 8.2 million. The Marine Corps maxes out about 475,000. It is just smaller. And by 1945, the Marine Corps is beginning to shrink a little bit. At war's end, the Army outnumbers the Marines 17 to 1. And Marines are really cognizant of the fact that they are the smallest branch. That's true today. The disparity is not quite as dramatic, but in 2001, the fiscal year, there are 5 times as many people in the Army as in the Marine Corps. And that's reflected in the budget that everybody cares about too. The Marines are the smallest. They have the smallest budget. In fiscal year 2009, the Marines are just that little gold slice there, a tiny fraction of what the Army, Navy, and Air Force are getting. And so the Marines, since almost their beginning, and I think consistently throughout their history, have to contend with the fact that they are smaller, they have a smaller budget, and they are not necessarily doing anything that the Army and the Navy couldn't do for themselves if they absolutely had to. And so I think the two things that Marine leaders fear the most are being cut completely, or perhaps even worse, being subsumed into the Army and Navy, where the things that the Marine Corps do get absorbed and done by other branches. And this is, I think, really the core issue that Marines have faced and that your Marines are thinking about when they join. A Marine general named Victor Krulak in 1957 said this very bluntly, that the United States does not need a Marine Corps. But for reasons that he said completely transcend cool logic, the United States wants a Marine Corps. And so from throughout their history, the Marines have been trying to do two things, I think. One is to figure out something that they can do that the other branches can't, or that they can do better than the other branches can, and then to create this mystique that sets them apart as special. They're small, have a smaller chunk of the budget, but they are very aware of the fact that Americans believe that there is something special about the Marine Corps and they want a Marine Corps. And Krulak is, I think, speaking to this idea that we have to keep that special mystique going. We have to keep Americans believing that they want a Marine Corps. So we see the Marines in the 19th century and the early 20th century doing all sorts of things. They are part of the Barbary Wars in the very early decades of the country. In fact, their service at Tripoli is part of the Marine Corps hymn. It's U.S. Marines that are banging down the door and capturing John Brown at Harper's Ferry back in 1859. They're the ready troops that Robert E. Lee takes to put down that incipient rebellion. They fight in the Spanish-American War, and for 20 years, from like 1914 to the mid-1930s, the Marines are deployed throughout the Caribbean and places like Haiti and Nicaragua, doing something I think we would now call like nation building. These are known as the Banana Wars. They're not particularly well known, but it's a 20-year effort by the Marine Corps to bring some stability and order to America's backyard. They are building roads, they are building post offices, they are occasionally engaging in firefights with local bandits. It's a 20-year deployment, and it's the Marines trying to figure out something that they can do for the United States that the Army and Navy either can't do or won't do. The Marines look back on their Banana Wars experience, and they actually consider making this their thing. They publish a manual that you're looking at here where they refer to small wars, what we would probably today call peacekeeping or nation building. And they have a booklet on how to do it. And they are thinking, perhaps this will be the thing that we can do that will guarantee us a budget and a future. But The thing about nation building and using American military personnel to build roads and guard post offices is it's not very exciting. It's not necessarily something that you need military personnel to do. And the Great War has been raging in Europe since 1914. In 1917, the United States gets involved, and Marines are going to be there. And this strikes a lot of Marine leaders like the thing that they want to do. So the Marines will answer the call and will advertise the fact that because they are small, they can be first into the fight. They are a smaller force, but they're nimble and they're light, and they can be America's emergency responders. And so in the recruiting posters and advertising of the First World War era, there's a lot of first to fight belligerence. Marines are the people who get there first and take the fight directly to the enemy. And you can see some of this is part of building this mystique, right? The Marines go anywhere, they do anything. I find the poster on the right really fascinating. It looks like a sort of buttoned up businessman who has seen something appalling in the headline that the Germans are killing women and children, and he's stripping off his button-down suit as if he is ready to go right into the fight. Like, you tell that to the Marines, and they are going to answer. And in fact, Marine service in the Great War results in some incredible episodes of heroism and battlefield courage. There's a news report that comes out that the Germans are so impressed and afraid of Marines' fighting spirits that they nickname them the Devil Dogs, the Teufelhunden. It seems that that story is apocryphal. It's invented by a journalist later. That's there's not a lot of suggestion that that's actually something that German soldiers came up with on their own. But the nickname sticks, and the Marines start to cultivate this idea that they are the devil dogs, the toughest, hardest fighters in the First World War. And over again, you see in their own advertising references to the Marines as, the finest fighting organization that America has. They emphasize over and over again, first to the fight, deploy anywhere in the world. And this sense of excitement really crowds out that idea of nation building and peacekeeping and small wars. So even as the Marine Corps is coming out with this doctrine manual, they have already started to move away from it. The dust cover you see on the right is from a book called War is a Racket by a Marine general named Smedley Butler, a four-star general, one of just a handful of people to be twice awarded the Medal of Honor for heroism in battle. And in the 30s, he writes a memoir in which he talks about his service in these banana wars as a kind of gangster enterprise on behalf of capitalism. It's not the kind of thing that you want someone high up in your branch to talk about. And in the decade before the Second World War, the Marines are already shifting away from peacekeeping and nation building and looking around to find something else that they can do, driven consistently by this fear that they are going to be put out of business by not having a core function. And the core function that they settle on in the decade and a half before World War II is amphibious landing. This is still a relatively new form of warfare. And the Marines settle upon this in the years before World War II as the thing that they are going to practice and excel at. They will become America's ready force to go anywhere where you need to put troops on a hostile beach. That turns out to be a very savvy decision on the part of the Marine Corps. When war breaks out on December 7th, 1941, America goes to war against Imperial Japan across the massive Pacific Ocean. And the only way to wage that fight is going to be a long campaign of island hopping, which we'll talk about in a future webinar. But Marines and Army personnel are going to have to land on enemy beaches over and over and over again. And this is the thing that the Marines have spent a decade getting ready for, always eager to make sure that they have a vital role to play in national defense, and always fearful that if they're not considered vital, they might get cut or subsumed. And so the Marines, as they go into the Pacific theater in the Second World War, have both a history of constantly reinventing themselves and also a thing that they have practiced for and thought about and developed doctrine for that is going to be invaluable in the Pacific theater. Here you can see Marines in their landing craft making their way towards Iwo Jima, one of a number of absolutely ferocious landings that the Marines will make in the Second World War and that you'll learn about in the course of your research. You can see here some of the wreckage of the amphibious landing, including some of the troop carriers and some of the construction equipment. This is extraordinarily difficult stuff when you get into the part of your research about soldiers' experience. If your Marine is under fire, you will get a very clear sense of what an enormous challenge it is to try to land troops on a beach held by an enemy. Iwo Jima is among the most famous moments the Marines have in the Second World War. And if it is the most famous, it's probably because of this photograph, which almost all of you have seen. I think it is perhaps the most iconic photograph of the 20th century, certainly the most iconic photograph, I think, of the United States experience in World War II. And there's a wonderful comment related to this photograph that I think relates back to things we were talking about just a few minutes ago. The Marines need to have a role to play that no other branch can do. And also, the Marines need to constantly advertise their importance and their mystique to the American people. James Forrestal, in February of 1945, talked about the photograph and the events it depicted and said the raising of that flag on Mount Suribachi means the Marine Corps for the next 500 years because average Americans are going to see that picture over their toast and orange juice and think the Marines can do anything. And we'll see over and over again, even after World War II, this constant attempt to reinvent themselves and to cultivate a mystique as something that Americans don't necessarily need, but need to be reminded over and over again that they want. Krulak actually goes on in a little more detail here, and I want to share the rest of the letter that he wrote here. He acknowledges that the Marines exist not because of what Marines know they can do, but because of what regular American voters and taxpayers believe they can do. And he says the Marines have created this sense in the American public of what the Marines are. And it's that sense that keeps people returning to the idea of we don't need this thing, but we want it. And Krulak says there's sort of three things. First, that Americans believe that when trouble comes, there are Marines who have made themselves ready to do something useful about it and do it at once. And that idea of the Marines as being nimble and the first responders is a huge part of that mystique. Krulak says, second, when the Marines do go to war, they turn in a performance that is dramatically and decisively successful. And Krulak says it's not just, often or most of the time, but always. And it's given a kind of mystical faith in the American public in what the Marines can do. And he's talking about the importance of maintaining and developing that faith. And then he says third is what the Marine Corps does, not just in terms of fighting a battle here or answering an attack there, but what it means to the fabric of the nation. He says the Marines have an idea that they are masters of a form of unfailing alchemy which converts unoriented youth into proud, self-reliant, and stable citizens. That's something that the Marine Corps does, takes, aimless young men and makes them aimless boys and turns them into men. And that's something that you see repeated over and over again in Marine Corps advertising and Marine Corps recruiting, that the Marines are special, that they have a mystique, that they can do things that the other branches can't do, and that going into the Marine Corps is a test, a rite of passage, and that successfully becoming a Marine is meaningful. It shows that you have accomplished something difficult. Let me pause there and point out two things that run through all the posters we've looked at. First of all of the subjects in the Marine Corps recruiting that we've looked at here are white. And in fact, I have looked at this point in my career, probably 2000 World War II era American posters, and I don't know that I've ever seen a black subject in a Marine Corps poster. I'll have to go back and double check, but they are overwhelmingly, if not exclusively, white. And that kind of elides an important fact, which is following FDR's Executive Order 8802, the Marine Corps opens up in 1942 to Black Marines. Now, as you're discovering, the United States sends a segregated Army and Navy. It sends a segregated military off to fight World War II. So there are no there are no units that are black and white. And most of the combat arms are restricted to white soldiers only. So when the Marines open up to Black Americans, they are in segregated units. They become known as the Montford Point Marines because of the training camp that they pass through. And by 1943, we are starting to see Black Americans in Marine uniforms. And so, if your silent hero, went through Montford Point, you've got an even more interesting story to tell. This is a really new development in the history of the Marine Corps between 1942 and 1943. The other thing that you notice about these posters is that all of the subjects are men. And in fact, I think manhood and masculinity and making men is a huge part of what the Marine Corps has advertised itself as during this period, and I think even to this day, that the United States Marine Corps builds men. Krulak says something about that. We take aimless youths, we turn them into citizens. That glosses over the fact that there are women in the Marines. There is a Marine Reserve during World War II. And so we've got American women who are serving in the Marine Corps in reserve capacities. And there's a really fascinating dynamic there too, because the Marines have cultivated this very specific self-image that the Marines are different. All of the American branches, the Army, the Navy, the Coast Guard, all have women's auxiliaries or women's reserves. But the Marines, because they are small and because they see themselves as constantly embattled, have created an image in which every Marine is first and foremost a rifleman. That is, every Marine should think of himself first as someone who is at the front line pulling a trigger. In military parlance, this is known as the tooth to tail ratio. The tooth is the part of your force that's doing the fighting, and the tail is the part that is providing support, delivering supplies, handling logistics. In the Army, the tooth to tail ratio is about 1 to 10. So there's a lot of tail for that tooth. The Marine Corps, one of the things that it claims is special and distinctive about it is that it has a very high tooth to tail ratio because every Marine is, in theory, first and foremost, a trigger puller. That makes things kind of interesting for women because women until the 21st century are prohibited from jobs in the combat arms. And so we've got American women who are in the Marine Reserves, and there are fascinating conversations happening in the Marines. More than I think the other branches, the Marines consider the women to be fully Marines. They don't say like, oh, they're female Marines. They say they're Marines. We are all Marines. But American women are prohibited from doing the one thing that is supposed to be the most distinctive thing that Marines do, which is stand on the front lines and fight. And so you get some kind of interesting posters where you see women who are doing really important things, but they can't be first to fight because women cannot serve in the front lines. And so we get this kind of interesting paradox. You can be a Marine, but your job is to free a man to go onto the front line. And I find that to be kind of an interesting tension and an interesting paradox that's really specific to the Marine Corps. Again, because they have to carefully cultivate this image as being separate, as being special. They are constantly living in fear of being cut or subsumed. So that's a kind of quick overview of the kind of culture that your silent hero is joining, the organization that they are going to be part of. It's really different than the Army and the Navy in this period, and it sees itself as different. And it very self-consciously cultivates this sense of difference because it's a survival mechanism. They're smaller, they're less well funded, they have to constantly prove their value. And you keep seeing that even into the 70s, 80s, 90s, the 21st century. The thing that is, in one way, the Marines' vulnerability, which is they are so small, becomes a selling point. It's not that they are tiny, it's that they are elite. They are more selective than the other branches. Becoming a Marine is a test because so few people are there. And you'll see a lot of the recruiting that happens in the 1980s and 1990s after we have gone to an all volunteer force is really kind of emphasizing this idea of the Marines as a test, a place to prove yourself. They're still, I think, mostly emphasizing manhood, but they have taken this idea that the Marines are small and turned it into the Marines are elite. The Marines can get there faster. They are the force that you call when there is an emergency. They will get wherever the country needs them to go and do something useful about it. If you're my age, within a decade either way, you might remember some of these things. And our supplemental item that we'll post tomorrow is a video clip that was playing during Saturday morning cartoons in the late 80s and early 90s that I think really pulls all this together into a kind of unforgettable scene about what it means to be a Marine and to prove yourself and to join the Corps. And this idea, the few, the proud, maybe you can join us, I think is part of the cultural legacy. So that's a quick kind of cultural history of the Marines. I'm going to turn things over to Miss O'Hara, and then I'll stay on the line and we'll have a conversation and answer questions later.
You're muted, Lynn.
Thank you. Sorry about that. See, I thought I had a good transition there. Okay, so we're going to transition. We looked at the big version, right? So we looked at the big story of the Marine Corps, so going from 1775 till just about today. And we see kind of how our World War II Marine veterans fit in the middle of it. But now we're going to transition from the big level, the macro history, down to some of this micro history of how is it that we go about learning about our silent heroes and what their story was. Now, in order to be able to do this, there's a couple important things that we need to do. First off, we need to be able to kind of segment the story a little bit because honestly, if we try to do all of it all at once, it's really not going to work very well. So, what we'd like to do is to start by looking at this idea of researching a silent hero's life before the war. And the challenge of this is really because we start at the end of the story. We start by knowing when our silent heroes have died. And we kind of go from the end and we've got to go back to the beginning. Because while I think sometimes we think about someone's military service as a defining point in their life, and many of our silent heroes have said that, it's not the only part of their life. So we're going to start. Every time we do this, I'm going to use a different silent hero story to just do a little bit of modeling. And I'll be honest, this is probably one of my favorite World War II Marine Corps veterans, a man named John Dooley Rucker, who is buried at the National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific in Honolulu, Hawaii. And this is his grave. This is kind of the ending point. But what we need to do is go back. This is his photograph from his official military personnel file. And I've linked to his full profile so you can read that a little later. But what's his story? How does he end up in the Marine Corps? And what happens before that? what we want to make sure that we're doing is keeping the end picture in mind. We're going to be encouraging you to visit nhdsilentheroes.org and playing around with our gallery feature, looking and reading some of the veteran stories, some of the silent hero stories. Your final work will be posted here, as well as the Veterans Legacy Memorial, which is sponsored by the National Cemetery Administration. But the difference is we add profiles as we had stories. The Veterans Legacy Memorial has a blank page for everybody in their cemeteries, but most of them don't have stories. So we want you to kind of play around and get some sense of what it is we're going to be producing. But in order to start, what we actually want to do is start with the US Census. I'm a bit of a census nerd, I'll be honest about that. And what I think is interesting about the census is the fact that it's in the initial US Constitution. And it's in the Constitution that we're going to count our population every 10 years. It's designed to be for congressional representation, but it becomes really a historical treasure trove. The census takes the country and divides it up into enumeration maps. And I pulled just two different locations to give you a sense. On the left, you have Loup County, Nebraska, a very rural area. And you can see that these enumeration districts are very, very large. We're talking about large areas that someone's going to go around to count the people in those areas. On the right, you can see the upper part of the borough of Manhattan, of what's now New York City. You can see Central Park in the middle. And every time you see one of those purple numbers with a circle, that's a different enumeration zone. So it can go from anywhere from miles and miles to truly something that could be walkable. And the idea is it's going to be the job of the US government to count our citizens, to figure out where they are and how we're going to use this information. Now, the census changes over time, and we've got a lesson on this, teachers, that you can use to work with your students. But we're going to start with the story of John Dooley Rucker and his family in 1930. They're living on Signal Hill Drive in Centerville Township in St. Clair County, Illinois. Now, this is one of these examples where cursive is going to be very, very handy because let's be honest, that's part of history. But just in case you're having a little trouble reading this, I'm going to go ahead and break it down. So let's take a look at the Rucker family as they exist in 1930. The head of the household is the dad of the family, so Ray Rucker. He works as a superintendent at the Alcoa Oil Company. He is not a veteran because they had a column where they asked that. And he's been married for 21 years to Elsie Rucker. So Ray is 56, Elsie is 41. Living at the home, they have 5 of their children. So their oldest daughter, whose name is also Elsie, very common in this time period. Elsie is 19. There's a daughter, Amy, who's 17. Robert, their oldest son, is 16. John, our silent hero, is 15. And there's a 3-year-old daughter named Helen. In addition, there is an young African American woman named Ruth who is also whose occupation is listed as servant, someone who lives with the family as her job. We know from this information, from the census, that the parents and all of the older children, all but Helen, well, she is only 3, can read and write, as can Ruth. We know that the family owns their home and it's worth about $15,000. And we know the family owns a radio. So I'm going to pause here just a second. I'm going to ask you, and again, if you're students here, I want you in here, and teachers, I also want you in here. This is factual information. This we can pull out pretty quickly. But how can this one piece of census data help drive us to ask questions where we might be able to learn more about the Ruckers, about John Rucker and his family? So go ahead into that Q&A box. We're going to pause for a second. What questions might you have about the Rucker family? This is my favorite part. This is the part where we wait to see who's going to answer. And I'm a teacher. I'm not scared of wait time.
I've got what school did the children attend
Mm. We know all the kids went to
or
school, so we might want to
currently are
find
attending?
what the schools are in the area, right? Where would you have gone to maybe high school or elementary school in this area? Elsie, is she in high school? If we know that they went to school, what other kind of sources might we look for to learn a little bit about either more about John or his siblings?
We also have why is there such an age gap?
There
That's
is an
an
interesting
interesting one.
age gap there, but that happens in families sometimes. But that is an interesting question. That could show maybe there's a gap. What else might it show? What might be a question we have to ask in history?
To go back to your first question, someone said yearbooks would be a good um,
Absolutely.
source for them
More
to
and
look at.
more yearbooks are being digitized and shared, either on Ancestry or on school district websites. And sometimes, even if they're not shared, if you can figure out what the school is and reach out either to the school district office or hint the school librarians. Sometimes they have copies of these old yearbooks, or sometimes things like student newspapers or other records that they have stored either in the schools themselves or sometimes at the district offices. Those can be amazing records to tell about families. What other questions might we want to ask to learn more about the Rucker family?
I've got, is Elsie employed or is she a homemaker?
That's a good question. She is listed as a wife without an occupation or place of work. So we assume that mom is what we would call a stay-at-home parent or stay-at-home wife today.
Oh, interesting question. Are all children in the home both of theirs?
That's a very good question. Now, it looks and appears, now they've been married for 21 years. Their oldest child is 19, the youngest child is 3. So there's a very good chance of that, but we don't know that for sure. But that always be a question we could ask.
And someone said, has deduced that they seem like they're pretty comfortable economically and wondering if Robert and John had jobs, perhaps.
Yeah, that's really interesting. We know that dad is a superintendent, so he's pretty high up. I don't know too much about the Alcoa Ore Company, but I'll bet you that's something we could research. And the house has a good bit of value. That's a good bit of money to have saved up, and we'll come back to that in just a second. One of the things that I want to point out is we want to search not just John, but we want to learn a little bit about the other family members as well. So when you're pinging Ancestry and we're looking on newspapers, search for Ray, search for Elsie, search for Amy, search for Robert. What would be maybe one or two other questions that you might ask about the family and try to go seek an answer to? And then we'll move on to our next step.
Who are the neighbors? The
Yes.
question. Who else is living around them?
The best part about census data is the census people walk down the street. So by flipping through the pages, just going down and up, you can see who else lived on the street. What kinds of jobs did they have? Where did they work? What'd they do? And, did they own their homes? Did they rent their homes? How valuable were those homes?
And along those lines, was having a servant normal? Someone's asking. You would see that if you were walking down the same street.
Yeah. Ruth is somebody I need to know more about too. I don't know anything about her. Did she grow up in the area? Was her family local? She was 19 and living with the family, so she's the same age as the oldest daughter. All right, I'm sure we've got more good things, but let me keep moving just in the interest of time here. But these are the kinds of questions we want to be asking. So we know this is the Rutgers in 1930. Let's jump ahead 10 years. This is John Rutgers, World War II draft registration card. And pop into Q&A. What's something that pops into your head, something you notice? And we know at this point he's 25 years old, but he doesn't have a what?
No employer,
He doesn't
someone
have a
said.
job. Now,
Yeah.
there could be a lot of reasons for that, right? We don't know. We'll come back. We have some clues about what he might have been doing during that time. But I wanted to show you something fun. I was intrigued by the fact that we know that the family lived at 7 Signal Hill Boulevard. That's the same street they were living in 1930. So I decided to just do a little digging and I did a little search and I actually found the family's house site. This is on a realtor site. I thought this was interesting. This is 7 Signal Hill Drive in Belleville, Illinois. And what I looked when I read that East St. Louis and Belleville are next to each other and the town split, that house was built in 1921. So there's a very good chance that's the house the Ruckers lived in. And that would be another clue to how well the family is doing. That's a pretty nice house. And somebody's done some nice renovations inside, but I'll let you look that up. But how do we get to the point that when World War II breaks out, John Dooley Rucker will be a U.S. Marine serving on the island of Guam in the Pacific? There's a couple steps there. I'm going to leave it at that. You can read his story if you want, and we'll come back to his story later. But what I want you to keep in mind as we're doing this research, a couple things. First off, the census is not perfect. The census gives us a lot of information, but we can't always find anyone. We know that the census is something that people have traditionally been a little afraid of. This is from 1950 from the National Archives. Sometimes people don't want to talk to the census taker. Sometimes they're nervous to talk to the census taker. Maybe they might have concerns about someone's citizenship, or maybe someone who might have a record, or maybe somebody who might be looking for them. So know that we don't always find everybody in the census. Things we want to do when we find a record. We want to start with what facts we know, what we can learn about the family, what we can learn about the neighborhood or the community, what inferences we can make, just like we've been doing here, and then what questions we can generate to learn a little more. Now, what are we doing in this module? We want to look at our silent hero story from the time they were born to the time they joined the military. We want to learn more about their families, their communities. We want to see if we can figure out where they attended school. Did they have a job? Did they work? Did they practice a trade? Did they have any religious affiliations? Were they a member of a community group, a church, a synagogue? What were their hobbies? Who were their friends? What were they interested in? I think you'll find that you'll see some people who sound pretty familiar to you. What I love about this section is that the research is going to take you in different directions. Sometimes we learn about silent heroes who attended a particular school or were involved in a particular church. Sometimes we find our silent heroes were athletes. Maybe they played football or were wrestlers or were cheerleaders, and we learn a little bit more about some of the things that feel pretty familiar to us. Sometimes we can learn about where they lived, and if we get lucky, we might even be able to see the house in which they lived or grew up. One of my favorite stories, one of our silent heroes worked, both him and his father, as a what was called a beach boy on Waikiki Beach. So think kind of like a combination between like a surfer dude and a lifeguard on Waikiki Beach in Honolulu, Hawaii. So these research paths are going to take us in some different directions. A couple things we want to know every time we hit research. The first thing we've got to do is figure out what we're looking at. The second thing we want to do is take the time to break the source down. Look at all those little details. Anytime you find a source, whether you're using Ancestry Classroom, whether you're using a database to find newspapers, I want to get you in the habit now. Download a copy of the source, save it as either a JPEG or a PDF, and put a copy in your folder. Trust me when I say that's going to save you so much time down the road. Put the information in the research organizer, add some questions, and cite as we go. So what does that look like? We've created research organizers that your teachers have access to help you. We start on the left with some prompt questions. So questions like, when and where was your silent hero born? Use these as starters, but don't take them just literally. So we've got some specific information like a date and a place, but excuse me, what do we know about that place? What do we know about that community? We start with our prompt, then we go to our response. And this is really important. It's so important that we make sure we're researching responsibly. So everything that goes in that response column should be your own words. That's really important. We want to synthesize. If there's a direct quote that we need, great, put it in quotation marks. But this is not where we take a source, copy and paste, and dump it into the organizer. Doesn't work that way. We also need to track our sourcing. Where did we find that? Where did that information come from? And because part of our research mentor's job is to vet or check all of the facts, is to link to that. So if it's something available on the web, like Find a Grave, this is where I got this information, link to Find a Grave. That lets your mentor check it. Anything that's behind a password paywall, we need you to download a copy. Hey, we know this information because of the 1930 census. We have a copy in our folder and it's very clearly labeled. And that's really important. Keep your sources, keep them organized. Taking that second to download it from your source, upload it to your folder, and giving it a logical name like Rucker Family Census 1930 will save you hours upon hours down the road. Trust us on this one. At the bottom of the organizer, we have some blank lines. What else did you know? Did you encounter something interesting? And also, what questions do you still have? We honestly, we're not going to be able to answer every question, but sometimes if you put a question there, your research mentor might be able to give you a clue or a hint of where we might be able to answer it. The other piece, and I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this tonight, is that we're going to build our bibliographies as we go. Because these are being published publicly, we're going to cite everything perfectly and we're going to use Chicago format. A lot of the sources you're using are very unique sources. So what we have provided is samples. So on the left-hand side, you'll see a sample citation. All you're going to do is copy and paste it to the right if you used it and update the information. So my census data didn't come from New York State, it came from Alabama. Didn't come from Richmond County, it came from Fayette County. So all I'm going to do is update those citations. And if I do that, my bibliography in the end is going to be really, really simple. All right, couple pro tips as we're wrapping. First thing, Miss Kennedy created a video that shows you how to access, how to upload, how to download, and how to fill out everything correctly. Take the time to watch it. It's going to save you a lot of time and stress. If you forget how to do something, go back to that. My biggest tip, pace yourself. If you try to do a month's worth of research in the last 24 hours with your students, it doesn't go well. We all know that. So give yourself a little bit of time each week. Maybe work on 2 or 3 rows. Come back. Research takes time. I know it sounds like a lot of this stuff should be really simple, and sometimes it will be. But sometimes it's going to take some digging, some research, maybe even some emails and phone calls to find the answers to some of these questions. Know that you won't be able to answer everything. And that's just the reality of this research. Stay focused on life before World War II. If you stumble upon something about what happened to them either while they were serving or later in life, that's great. Don't put it in this organizer. Put it in the folder, save it. We're going to come back to it. It's important that we do that because if we try to cram everything into the first organizer, we're going to get overwhelmed. Ask good questions and seek answers. See what you can find. Leave your research mentor a note like, hey, we're trying to figure this out. We talked to this person and we tried this source and it's coming up empty. If they know what you've tried, they can usually give you better advice about what you might try next. Search different names. That's especially important if your silent hero has a relatively common name, because sometimes we can find the family member faster and then through them find your person. We have some tips in the instructions for connecting with families. And if you get the opportunity, do that. Most importantly, please, please, please don't let yourself get frustrated. It's so hard to find somebody's been frustrated for 2 weeks and they tell us, and nobody's had a chance to help them. We have an amazing team of research mentors, Mrs. Kennedy and myself, Dr. Hamner, who are more than happy to help you. But we can't read your mind. We've got to know what's going on, what's working, what's not, so that we can give you some advice and help get you on track. All right, we're reaching the end and we're 4 minutes early, which means we're right on time. I'm going to ask everybody before you leave tonight, to please take a moment and submit your attendance survey. That's really important. Teachers have to do it. Students are welcome to do it. And if you're a parent or guardian, we'd love to hear your feedback as well. You can either use the QR code or use tinyurl.com/NHD-NCA-live. So what I'm going to do is I am going to go ahead and leave that up. But this is the time we're going to transition to Q&A. We know that it's very possible that you need to go. We know it's getting late on the East Coast. We know it's getting near dinner time on the West Coast. And if you need to go, that's fine. Please complete your survey before you go. And what I would just say is this is a great time to ask anything you want. So you can ask us about the history piece. You can ask us about the research piece. Heck, if you got a good ADHD question, throw it our way too. But we're going to turn the webinar open and see what questions are either sitting in the queue or might come into the queue that we can help you with.
So we do have one that you kind of alluded to, but I'll let you speak on it a little bit more. Someone asked, as we research, should we be reaching out if possible to family members?
Yes, but I would caution, maybe don't reach out on the first day. If you have made a contact or if you do make contact with a family member, what I would suggest is schedule a time to talk with them, but not until we're about, I'd say, at least 6 weeks into the hardcore research. Because if you talk to them now, they'll be able to give you some info, but you're not going to be able to ask the really good questions until you can do some digging. So, what I would suggest is setting up a time to talk with them, maybe either right before or right after Thanksgiving, because I think that might give you a good time frame where you can maybe ask some questions or set up a time for your students to Zoom with the family member, or if they're really local, if they're willing to come into your school. We do always encourage that all contact be made by the teacher. And we also remind people that we don't necessarily know what the family member's relationship with this veteran was. Many will welcome you with open arms and share materials and tell you all about their dad, their mom, their aunt, their uncle, their cousin. And others might say, you know what, I'm really not okay to talk about that. And that's okay too. It is important, though, we have a family release form. If a family member shares anything, if they share photographs or documents or sit for an interview, we need to ask you to please have them complete that release form so that we can use their material on their website. We need absolute permission to use somebody else's content. So just a reminder that that's there, and we'll check in with you as you go. Like if you have an interview or you have family photographs, that's one of the things in editing we're going to make sure we have before we put it up on the web. But we're getting a little
Okay,
ahead
I
of
believe
ourselves
this is this one is a little ahead of ourselves too. I believe it's from a student. When should we have our research due, and when is the overall project due?
We're going to be working on this through April. So what we're going to encourage you, your teachers have the full schedule, so they can kind of give you a little bit more. But for right now, for the next 3.5 weeks, our focus is life before the war. Then we're going to turn to home front and community. Later, we'll talk about military and veteran experience. But right now, we want to start with just these two components and really just on the first one. You find new stuff? Great. Put it aside. I promise you we'll come back to it.
That's all I have for questions, believe it or
Okay.
not.
Well, we'll give it a second to see if any more come in. If you have one, go ahead and put it in. But Dr. Hammer, can you talk a little bit about pacing research and doing it over time and why that's so crucial as opposed to saying, I'm going to sit down for 2 hours and do all of it all at once. Not that any of us have ever done that before.
Yeah, I was going to say, sitting down and trying to do it all in 2 hours doesn't work, and don't ask me how I learned that. Um, I think the advice Ms. O'Hara gave about kind of slow and steady wins the race. So you chip away at it a little bit, and that has a bunch of advantages. So one of the things that you'll discover is that sometimes there is time lag. We'll request documents, or you'll want to try to order a book from the library, or you will reach out to a family member later and it'll take them some time to get back to you. And so just building in that expectation that you cannot snap your fingers and have all the things in front of you on the day. And so if you start early, you give yourself a chance to start kind of pulling documents and sources and historical items together. And then the thing that I've found going at a slow, steady pace and breaking a big job into a bunch of smaller jobs, just it first of all, it's much less stressful. And my brain, when it's not as stressed, tends to make more of these aha moments. A light bulb goes off where you say, oh, wait a minute. Um, I remember this from the other thing, or I wonder if the car club that he started is related to his interest in, trucks in the service. Maybe I should go back and look at this thing. You create a little breathing room where you have these flashes of insight or these flashes of inspiration, or you have a chance to reach out to one of us so that we can all put our heads together and say, how do we make these things fit? What story is hiding here? And so I think if you lay out the whole research project as a series of steps and you plan ahead and make sure that you're doing a little bit constantly, you avoid that last minute rush to do everything, which is incredibly stressful and in my experience does not produce, at least in my case, does not produce my finest work. I have had a much better success when I have a chance to kind of sit down and I don't feel the pressure to figure something out right this minute. When you get to a stumbling block, you give yourself a second to say, all right, I'm going to put this down. I'm going to come back in a day. I'm going to come back in, midweek and revisit it. I'm going to reach out to Dr. Hamner. I'm going to reach out to Ms. O'Hara. I'm going to reach out to Mrs. Kennedy. Um, you get better results in a less stressful environment. And I think
Mhm.
that's two great reasons.
Well, and I'm going to mention too, at this point, teachers, we're hoping everybody has gotten some way, somehow, access to Ancestry or Ancestry Classroom, whether that's through your school or through your local public library. If you are still in the stage of running into roadblocks with that, please don't wait. Talk to us now. That lets us do one of a couple things. If there's a hang up at the school level, we have a contact at Ancestry Classroom who can talk to the IT department and can speak the language of IT. We can help with that. Now, if the school is totally blocking it, and if you don't have access through your public library, we will help and pull you some files to get you started, right? You can't really do this if you don't even attempt to look at the census. It's not going to work. But it's important that you give us some time to do that because we can't pull everything 24 hours before the deadline, or even worse, after the deadline. We don't want to do that. And I think one of the beauties of having a student teacher project is that teachers, we're helping teach our students how we do this, right? We're teaching good academic standards, we're teaching time management and pacing, and we're teaching that, eat the elephant one little bite at a time. Because if we take it and do a little bit each week, it's not going to be overwhelming. And hopefully, it's not going to be stressful. And you get the excitement of, hey guys, guess what I found? Or, you know what? The school librarian just sent something back. Or guess what came in the mail today? And I can tell you, we get to have a lot of fun with that at our office. So, all of the silent heroes who you have on the list, we have sent military file requests to the National Archives. And I can tell you the first one came back today, and somebody's getting over a 100-page file. And there's something really exciting every time a file comes into the office. And the best days are when I get a stack of like this high of different files that are coming back our way. But Know that we're getting them. We're not going to share them right away. We're going to wait. We're going to wait till we get to that military research piece because we don't want you to jump to step 5 before we've gotten through steps 1 and 2. And no, I'm not going to tell you who it was, but it's a good one. I'm just telling you, it's a good one there.
We have one more question. So a teacher asked for the 4 major components prior to community military service veteran status. Approximately how long is the typical eulogy?
Good question. Let's separate 2 things. We've got the profile, which is the written story, all of the details. And then we have the eulogies, which is what's spoken. If you take a look at nhdsilentheroes.org, the goal for each section is to get at least 2 paragraphs. Now, sometimes when you look at these samples, sometimes we can get just, 2 or 3 paragraphs with basic details. Sometimes we hit a pay dirt and man, these can go on for a good page. Research is inherently uneven, so we can't give you a magic number. It's not necessarily 500 words or 3 paragraphs. It kind of depends what's there. I have always felt like sometimes we either get a lot of family information and a little bit of military or vice versa, but it just depends on the person. Now, the written part is where we include the whole story. When we get to eulogy writing, we've got a whole module about teaching you how to do that. Those are tighter. Those are usually in the 3 to 4 or 5 minute range max. So that's not necessarily telling every gory detail, but the most important things, and then telling us the synthesis. Why does this matter? Because this person lived, because this person did that, what can we learn today? Or what did this person teach their family, their children, their grandchildren? Or what's a lesson we take away? So it's kind of a combination of the written piece, the full story, and then the short spoken piece. And again, we'll get into all of those. And we added over 100 Korean War veterans last year. So just filter in the gallery by Korean War and veteran, and you're going to have more examples than you can possibly realize. We're going to start highlighting some good and interesting ones as we move forward. Like, hey, start your Monday in class with this eulogy video, or start by reading this home front section. It'll give you some ideas of what it could be.
It feels a little counterintuitive, but the shorter piece can actually take more time to develop because it's so challenging. You'll get to know your person so well, and you'll want to share all of the details about their life, and you have to be really, really judicious. When I did one of these a few years ago, I wanted to just include everything, and it's really difficult in the shorter piece to decide what is the absolutely essential stuff I need to convey about this life.
Mhm. Yeah, the nice thing is about on our team is we have all done this and we have all struggled and we have all stood there in front of the video camera. So I can tell you, if you go to John Dooley Rucker's page, you'll get to see the eulogy that I had the opportunity to deliver. And it's a pretty amazing moment. And as one of our NCA staffers said last year, he said, I kind of struggled with this idea of eulogies and what was it going to look like and how was it going to be. And he said, I realized that's the moment that our students take ownership, that it's not about our project, that it's about their project and their veteran. And that's really, really powerful. And that's a moment that we hope that you'll all get to see this spring when you get to visit your local national or state cemeteries. All right. We'll give it a minute. Any other questions, comments, concerns, complaints, compliments? We'll take any of them.
Well, we did get a compliment. Someone said,
Let's
"This
share
has
it.
all been so helpful," with lots of exclamations and a thank you.
Well, that's the idea, right? We put these webinars at the beginning of the module to set you up, and then we kind of turn you loose, but know that we're here and know that we're here to ask questions. And I'll throw out one other idea. This is a project that Google is not very useful on. And I know that we're all conditioned to go right there to answer any question about life, from how do I fix my toilet to what's on TV tonight to, why should I what yeah. We're conditioned there. But it's largely not very helpful. We're going to have to learn new research pathways, new research strategies, and sometimes they come up empty, and that's okay because that's part of the process. But if you can tell us where you're going, we can help give you some leads, tips, and directions to help get you there. All right. Well, what we'll do, I'm
Nothing
going to
new.
go ahead and I'm going to pause our recording here and we'll go ahead and wrap for the evening.